Onundan keyin hozir bulupmu dünyanın terrorizm hareketi başlangandan keyin Xitoy hukumatı biz islom diniga e'tiqod qilganligimiz uchun darhol bizni yo'qotishni, dunyo terrorizm hareketini bizni yo'qotishning siyosatiga aylantirib oldi.
And after the tragic events of 9/11 in this country, and because we happen to be Muslims, and the Chinese government saw that as a golden opportunity to justify the heavy-handed oppression of the Uyghur people, and began to intensify its repression of the Uyghurs, portraying us as so-called terrorists.
Uyghur halkı şunçilik tinçlik beraber herkes radikal Müslüman emas, bunu Müslümana okşaş, normal, şundak bir ahköngül halk idi.
In fact, Uyghurs are very moderate Muslims, just like me. They're not radicals. They are very extremely peace-loving and hospitable people.
Şunundan tartib Uyghur halkını keng ko'lamda bastırış, tutqun qilish, turmularga minglab tashlash, terrorist bölgünçi deb turib, o'ldirib tugitishni Xitoy hukumati hech qanday dunyodan taptatmay ilgari surdi.
Since 9/11, the Chinese government, using the global war on terror as an excuse, and also arrested, imprisoned, and executed so many of the Uyghurs with impunity, without much international concern.
Xitoy hukumati o'zi bergan Xinjiang Uyg'ur avtonom rayon degan huquqda o'z taqdirini o'zi belgilash, o'z tili bilan so'zlash, o'z diniy e'tiqodi, o'z madaniyatini taraqqiy qildirish degan vazifasi bor edi.
When you look at actually the China's so-called ethnic autonomy laws, you would see actually Chinese government guarantees self-rule of the people who have the autonomy. Their language, culture, religion, ways of life are supposed to be respected.
Hazır ularning hammasidan shunchalik yuzsiz bilan yuzni o'rib, uning aksinchisiga ish qildi.
In fact, the Chinese government has never honored those rights, but to the contrary, they violate all of those rights guaranteed under the law.
Birinchi qilib bu bizning Jungoning ayrilmas bir qismi bizning ziminimiz degan gapni o'ttirib chiqarishga boshladi.
Their first, of course, propaganda, the rhetoric is, this is our land, it's part of China since ancient times.
Shuning bilan bizning ona tilimizni, dinimizni, milliy kimligimizni butunlay cheklashga boshladi.
Then the Chinese authorities began to specifically target our Uyghur language, culture, religion, and basically target our identity.
2003-yildan boshlab 50 yildan beri ijro qilinmagan siyosatni ijro qilib, bizning tilimizni cho'rt cheklab, yaslidan tortib yuqori maktabgacha Xitoy tili bilan so'zlashni amalga oshirdi.
And beginning in 2003, the Chinese government has officially banned the use of the Uyghur language in educational institutions from kindergarten all the way to college.
2003-yildan boshlab 7 yoshdan 16 yoshgacha bolalarimizni butunlay Xitoy o'lkalariga akitib, Xitoy tilida o'qiydiganga yo'tkab ketishga boshladi.
And around the same year, the Chinese authorities began to implement another policy, which is to forcibly recruit young Uyghur kids and take them to China's mainland provinces and schools to be completely educated in Chinese.
Yani şu 2003-yildan boshlab 14 yoshdan 25 yoshgacha to'y qilmagan qizlarni Xitoy o'lkalariga yo'tkab ish berimizda har bir oiladan bir qizdan berisanda Uyghur xalqi chidilma qilib bo'lmaydigan qo'rqinchli siyosatni va Uyghur xalqining axloqida yo'q bir axloqni Uyghur xalqiga qildi.
And in 2006, the Chinese government began to implement another extremely provocative policy, which is to forcibly transfer young unmarried Uyghur women to eastern Chinese provinces, to the factories, to work as cheap labor. This is against Uyghur tradition, Uyghur moral tradition, Uyghur religious beliefs, and Uyghur culture.
Her bir ailedən birdən, ikiden, üçdən qızlarını epmangdı. Bəmigellərinin hamısını tutup bölgünçe terörist deb turmağa taşlap, aldığı ölüm cezası, kaynak müddetsiz qamoq cezası hüküm qıldı.
The authorities forced parents, especially in rural areas, to give up their daughters to be recruited in this program. If they resist and were not willing to give their daughters to the authorities for this specific purpose, they were arrested, imprisoned for opposing Chinese government policies.
Uyghur halkı bulupmu muş kız yötkeş meselesinde çiğkirap gidip en ahırda Xitaylar bilen karşılaşış, Xitay hükümetiyle karşılaşış meselesi intayın eğir oturuğa çıktı.
And this policy backfires so badly because it creates so much tension between the Uyghurs and the Chinese government.
Şunun bilen Xitay hükümeti netçi 10 minglığın Uygurlarını tutup turmuğa taşladı ve keng ko'lamda ölüm cezası hüküm kıldı.
And then when the Uyghurs opposed, of course, the Chinese authorities rounded up tens of thousands of the Uyghurs and especially parents and imprisoned them.
Bularga koyulgan isim terörist ve bölgünçü dep isim koyuldu.
Of course, the label is easy label. Just call them terrorists and separatists.
Xitay hükümetinden özen bergen siyaset, milli siyaset yoki özen bergen milli ittifaqlık hakkında gap qilgan her qanday Uyghur turmuğa taşlandı.
And when Uyghurs basically demanded that China should honor its own laws and respect the rights of the Uyghurs, and then they are arrested and imprisoned.
Özenler bilisler, ben parlament azasıttım Xitay hükümetinin içinde. Onundan sırt ben Xitay'da 7 bayının bir sıttım.
As you may already know that I was once a member of China's parliament. And also I was a very wealthy, seventh wealthiest person in China.
Ben eğer kendi makul desem Xitay bana onundan mı yukarı derecelerini verişi mümkün idi.
If I kept silence to all the atrocities, I would have been promoted to a higher position in China.
Xitay hükümeti günden güngü mening xizmetimni o'stirish bilan birga ko'zimni yumishimni talab qildi.
But every time when the Chinese government gives me some kind of incentive or some title, the government wants me to turn a blind eye to the reality on the ground.
Lekin ben o yolunu tanlab olamadım.
But I could not choose that.
Çünkü mening xalqimning ustiga kelayotgan adolatsizlik, xalqimning ovozini anglamayotgan Xitoy hukumati meni Xitoy hukumatining oldida rost so'zlab beqishga majbur qildi.
But the injustice and oppression suffered by the Uyghur people made me to speak the truth against the Chinese government.
En ahırda ben Xitoy parlamentida Xitoy hukumatining o'zi bergan qonunni mening xalqimga berishini, Şinjan'da yaşayotgan, Sharq Turkistonda yaşayotgan her millat xalqining o'rtaq ittifoq tinish o'tishini talab qildi.
So at last I spoke out against Chinese government at one of the big meetings, plenary session of the Congress. Then I demand the Chinese government to respect the autonomy law and allow the different ethnic groups in the region to live in peace.
Bizning xalqimizga, Uyg'ur xalqiga, yerli xalqlarga tinchlik bersa, her millat ko'chman xalqmi tinch yashayolmaydiganligini, Xitoy hukumatining o'zi bergan va'dasini turishini talab qildi.
I ask them to honor their words, and only when the Uyghurs, the indigenous population, were allowed to live in peace, and the settling population can live in peace.
Vay, nimishqa mening xalqimni qirsan dedim. Nimishqa mening xalqimga barobarlik bermaysan, nimishqa tinch yashag'in qo'ymaysan dedim.
And I asked, why do you always harass, imprison, and kill my people? Why don't you let them live in peace and with the Chinese people?
Lekin Xitoy hukumati menga shunda qartib qo'yib turib, yolg'on gap qildi. Sening xalqingni biz eng baxtli qilyapmiz, eng tinch yashayapmiz, eng xushal qilyapmiz dedi.
But China's leaders instead said, we are actually doing our best to allow your people to enjoy all the freedoms, to live a happy life under our rule.
Mening vatanimdan gaz, neft, oltin, oil, bütün yer asti 102 xil metal chiqadi.
And if you look at the natural resources that our homeland produce, it's more than 100 kinds. And gas, oil, gold, uranium, you name it, everything. All the rare earth that China has, pretty much we have.
Shunchilik boylikka ega, hozirgi Jungoning oltidan bir qismini egallaydi.
It is a huge area. It's 1/6 of today's China.
Lekin Xitoy hukumati mushundaq sharoit butun Jungoni beqiyotgan mening vatanimda chiqayotgan boylik bilan Jungoni beqib turib, bu nomrod xalqni biz beqiyotimiz deb dunyoga vaqirdi.
In fact, the natural resources of our territory, our homeland, is fitting the Chinese people, the rise of China, in fact. But on the contrary, the Chinese propaganda is we're helping this poor, backward people.
Chiqayotgan boylikning 1%ni basimi mening xalqim mushundaq bo'lib ketadi.
If the Chinese government shared some of those natural resources, like 1% or 2%, the local economy, the lives of Uyghurs would be much better.
Onu bəmsin, onu beriş mayaqlı turtusun, şu çıkıvatkan nepitlənin, yaki yerli hizmetlərinin aş halkını şunun da hizmet ilişkimi ruhsatlanmadı. Bütün köşmellerini açık hizmet verdi.
On the contrary, instead of sharing the natural wealth in the region, the Chinese government did not even give the jobs, like in the oil and natural gas industries, in the local areas. They gave all the jobs to the incoming Chinese settlers instead of the local Uyghur population.
Xitay ülküsündeki barlık köşmellerini Şarkı Türkistan akilip milyon köşmellerini işe orlaştırıp, menin halkımını mecburi Xitay ülkelerine tarqatlaştırdı. Hazırgıça 200 min kızımızını götkep ketdi.
So China initiated this forced population exchange program, which transfers millions of Chinese population to populate and dominate our homeland and dilute us, make us a minority. Whereas at the same time, the Chinese government forcing our young men and especially unmarried women transferred into Chinese provinces, to work as cheap labor.
Bunun bardaşlık veremey 2009 yılı 7. ayının 5. gün 10 minliğe Uyghur halkı namayışga çıktı.
As a result, the Uyghurs could no longer bear such an oppression. And the last July 5th, the Uyghurs, tens of thousands of Uyghurs, took the streets to demand their rights peacefully.
10 minliğe namayışçı kolu da Uyghur halkı Xitayning bayrağını kötemeydi. Çünkü ular besip alganlığı üçün. Şu ketim tinchlik bilen çıkanlığını ispatlaymiz dep Xitayning bayrağını kötürüp çıkan okuguchilarni keng ko'lamda Tiananmen maskarga o'xshash qirg'inchilik qildi.
And when this young man and the Uyghur women took to streets, actually some of them were holding China's red flag. That's unprecedented in our history because we do not recognize China as our country. But those Uyghurs who were holding the red flags to prove that they were Chinese citizens, they were not, they were peaceful to prove their peaceful intent. But still, the Chinese government sent in fully armed security forces and massacred these Uyghurs, just like in Tiananmen Square in 1989.
5 saat çıraqni o'chirib tashlab, avtomat bilan, birovnik bilan ko'ch-ko'chidik yosh 13 yoshli kichik bolalargacha kirib 10 ming odam bir kechada g'oyib bo'ldi.
Then the Chinese security forces turned off the street lights for like 5 hours. They began to shoot and kill the Uyghurs who were still on the streets. So it's like some 10,000 people who were part of the protest disappeared in one night. Nobody knows what happened to those protesters.
Kural ularda, hukuk ularda, kaltak ularning qo'lida. Lekin Uyg'urlar Xitoylarni o'ltirdi deb yolg'ondan video yasab chiqib butun dunyoga tashviq qildi.
But after the tragic event, the Chinese state media and Chinese government propaganda office put out the video footage blaming the Uyghurs attacked the innocent Han Chinese, whereas we could easily see, the Chinese soldiers were armed to the teeth, and they were the ones who were cracking down the unarmed Uyghurs. And in order to shift the blame and incite ethnic hatred, the Chinese government blamed everything on the peaceful Uyghur protesters.
7. ayının 9. günü 10 minligan Bingtuanning düşeceklerini qo'liga bir xil kaltak ko'tarib, öy-öйгө besib kirib Uyg'urlarni o'ltirgizdi.
And in the following days, the Chinese government actually incites hatred through their media and propaganda. Then provided even weapons to the Chinese people on the street, allowing them to attack the Uyghur houses and families and to kill a lot of Uyghurs.